Hello everyone, welcome back to The Hobby Musician. You're joining us today in the middle of a little mini-series that we've got going on. We are doing some repairs and restorations to an old vintage Hondo 2 professional series bass guitar. Now if you want to get caught up on any of the other episodes in this whole little series, go ahead and click the link at the top and that'll take you to a playlist with all of them. Today we are specifically focusing on some wiring. We talk in the first episode where we do the overview of what needs to be done to this bass is that somewhere along the lines over the decades, the pickup selector switch that you can see here snapped off. Whoever owned this kind of originally or maybe several owners later must have, been gigging or put it in a bag or stored it somewhere, and the switch just literally snapped off. You can see that there's no top to that. So that's a repair that we want to make to kind of get this bass back into playing condition. I want to start though, before we pull out the soldering iron and go, I want to start just by saying that I know as a developing musician myself, I know that wiring, anytime you talk about soldering things or changing pots or changing pickups on an instrument, that really starts to get into a territory that most musicians, I think it's fair to say, start to get a little nervous about. I didn't go to school for electrical engineering. Many folks out there probably didn't either. So trying to decipher wiring diagrams and feeling confident enough in skills of manipulating wires can really start to become uncomfortable for a lot of people. But I do want to say that some things, now I'm not going to say that I'm comfortable doing all kinds of wiring jobs, but I will say that things like replacing a component, for example, the pickup selector switch that we're going to replace, or replacing a pot, those are definitely things that with a little bit of homework. If you watch a couple tutorials on YouTube about soldering, just the process of soldering, and then you just do a little bit of sketching and kind of taking time to look at a wiring diagram, you really can, I just want to encourage you that you really can start to get a little more comfortable in something as simple as swapping a component. So what I did before I started filming this was I did my homework. I actually had this bass. You can see I've got the cavities open in the back. I sat down with some scratch paper and I started doing some tracing. I looked at the wiring that they originally put in here. This is all original wiring. And I started to trace. That's the big tip that I have for you today is do some tracing diagrams. Find out, label. I drew a little diagram of where the pots were, which ones were volume with a V, which ones were tone with a T. And then I started to follow and look at this particular bass. They used colored wires, different colors for different pots. So I was able to kind of make a diagram. That way I could write down what's currently in here. So I know that the neck pickup, they used a red wire for the signal from the neck pickup. Well, that red wire is traced to the current switch in the top position. And so by doing this, now I've drawn on here my replacement switch, and using the diagram that came from the company from this switch, I know that the certain position that they say should be the neck position is this top one here. So that's where I've drawn. I can use kind of some deductive skills to really just say, all I need to do is detach the red wire from this one and attach the red wire to the top peg on this switch, and I should be good to go. And that's really what I'm alluding to when I say that soldering and changing electrical components doesn't necessarily have to be a daunting task. As I said before, I'm not going to dive into swap out an entire preamp system on like an active bass. I'm nowhere near that kind of level. But I think many folks out there, if you start to have components that are going bad on an instrument, a pot that's starting to go bad on you, or a switch that breaks, these are definitely things that you can start to do. So without further ado, I'm gonna get my soldering iron plugged in, warmed up, and we'll be back in just a second to start actually doing the switch here. So I'll be back in just one sec. Okay, I'm back and I'm all set up. I've got the soldering iron plugged in and heated up, and I've got the various tools and things that I'm going to need kind of set out and laid out around me. I've got a variety of different kind of grabbing things, like I've got a bigger pair of needle nose pliers. I've also got a tiny pair of tweezers, just depending on what I need to kind of hold or manipulate. I've also got snips, wire cutters, and a knife to possibly strip. If I need to strip off or expose some new wire, having a knife would be good for that. Also, we've already talked about this, I've got my directions here all set up, and I've got the new switch ready to go. However, the first thing that we're going to need to do, we do need to remove kind of the old one. So really, these types of selector switches, they're really only held on, well, obviously with the wires in the back, but in order to be secured to the instruments, they have these external kind of external, I don't know, fairings that screw down. So you have the screw, the threads are on the switch itself, and then you have an external fairing that kind of clamps it to the body. So I'm actually going to take my pliers, and I'm going to, you know what, I'm actually going to get some bigger pliers to just come from the outside, and that's all you got to do. You just got to grip on the outside and unscrew that, and that'll loosen up the screw. So I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. I got my big pliers now, so I'm going to come down very carefully on top, and without scratching the body or anything, I'm just going to squeeze, and then now I'm just going to rotate. So instead of kind of coming down, you know, like a screw or a bolt or something like that, I'm just kind of coming down on top, and they're not on very much. It's already kind of loosened. And what I'm going to do, I'm taking my finger on the back side. I'm also trying to prevent it from spinning too much. If it starts getting loose, the whole switch might start spinning, and we don't want it to spin because that might actually rip out wires instead of gently removing them like we're going to do with the soldering iron. So as I'm loosening this, I can also see like it's got just more of that vintage dirt and grime is kind of coming out of it, but we are making progress here. So I'm going to work on this a little more, and then we'll come back when I got this done. All right, we got that outside fairing off. So now it actually is loose, and I can kind of push down on top, and the only thing holding it in is the wires on the back. So I'm going to flip this over, and one of the things, so we'll kind of try to have a couple camera views over here for you. We're going to, you can see now that it, well, hopefully you can see now, it's loose, and I can kind of push it, and it'll kind of come in and out. What I want to do is I actually want to melt the solder that's holding in the wires right now and gently remove those wires and kind of peel them back, hold them back to get this old switch out, also to give myself some space to put the new switch in. So that's what I'm actually going to do. I am going to use my tweezers. I'm going to hold the tweezers on one end, kind of gripping the wire, and I'm going to bring in the soldering iron, melt the solder, and as I'm melting it, I'm going to simultaneously be kind of pulling it back, and that's going to be able to get the old wires unhooked from the selector switch. So I'm kind of tip it this way a little bit so you can see that, but I'm going to just going down, I'm touching, so I'm going to start with the bridge wire, and then got it gripped with my tweezers, and then I'm just coming in on the other side, and it always depends. It depends on how hot your soldering iron is. Oh, there you go. And that's all it took. However hot your soldering iron is, sometimes it's just a 1 second touch, sometimes you got to hold it on there, but it just starts to melt that, and when I pull back, now I've got that bridge wire loose. So I'm going to keep going with this. The output wire, the signal wire, is in the middle. So I'm going to do the exact same thing, just touch it to it. Seems to be pretty hot here. There we go, and we're out. That was pretty easy. And then one more. We're going to do the neck pickup wire. Oh, and we're out. Super easy. Okay, and it's not a bad idea. Every time you kind of do a little bit of soldering, I've got this moist or wet sponge over here. You're going to want to kind of keep the tip of the soldering iron pretty clean, because if solder builds up, you just get this smoke and this kind of nasty smell in the air. Okay, so I've got the 3 signal wires on, but there still is a ground wire. But what I'm thinking I'm going to do, I'm going to see if I can get this mostly out, and then we'll unsolder the ground wire, because I think that'll probably help us just give us more space to work. So I'm going to use my needle nose pliers, and I'm pushing up from the bottom, and I'm also kind of grabbing and pulling back. Okay, there it goes. There it goes. Now, the good news, the good news is it kind of all came, and you can see here on the front that last little daub, that last little ball of solder is the only thing holding this on. So I'm actually going to hold this with my hand because the heat isn't going to get to my thumbs that quick. So I'm going to start, well, hopefully the heat's not going to get to my thumbs. We'll find out here in a second. I'm going to start trying to melt this big old glob of grounding, well, solder that's holding the grounding wire onto the casing here. The new switch that I'm putting in has its own mount for the grounding wire. This one, they just grounded it to the casing. So that's a good example that different companies, different designs can take a lot of different approaches when it comes to how you wire and how you ground something. I can tell you what, that's a big daub of solder, and it is starting to heat up. So I am going to hold it with some pliers and keep trying to melt this big old grounding wire. And we're making progress here. It's yeah, it just takes time. So I'll be back here in a second when I get this all melted and off. All right, we got it. Took a little work, but we got that last daub of solder off of the old switch. So once again, like I was saying before, I'm going to wipe off. There was so much, it kind of stuck to the tip of the iron there. We had a little bit, so a little splash of solder kind of came out, but you can it dries up really quickly. So if it does get on the body of the guitar, I probably should have masked all this off. But as we said in the first video of this mini series, it's got scratches on it. This is a vintage instrument. I'm not too precious about how this whole, the finish looks. What I want to do now is I want to kind of do what I'm going to call a rough fit. I want to see if I have enough wire kind of coming out of this to reach to all the things. So I'm not going to solder in anything, but I am going to kind of line up where the wires are going to go just to see if I've got enough. So on the new style of selector switch that I have, this port kind of on this side is our grounding port. So I'm going to do that first, and I'm going to try to manipulate here. I'm going to kind of bend this up so you can kind of see it. This uncoated wire is the ground for this particular model. So what I'm going to need to do somehow, I'm going to need to make sure that this feeds through and solders to this. So what I'm going to do with these needle nose pliers, I'm going to try to kind of like curl this wire so it got a little hook. I want just a little bit of a hook if I can, so it doesn't fall out on me while I'm trying to get the oh, and it just fell out on me. So I'll try to hook it a little better here. Because that way, like we said, this is just a quick way. We're not permanently, fixing these things in here, but we're kind of temporarily, we want to get things held in place so that it's a little easier to solder them in. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking in my head, I actually think it might just be easier to solder them because then I don't have to worry about it falling out. So that is what I'm going to do. I do have this little hook. You can kind of see it here. I've got it fed through and it's hooked a little bit. And so I'm going to use the body of the guitar. I'm going to rest the switch right there. Now I'm going to bring in the new solder and the soldering iron. And I'm right-handed, so I'm actually going to switch. I like to manipulate the soldering iron in my dominant hand and bring the soldering wire with my non-dominant hand. So again, I mean, like I said at the top, you can kind of watch some tutorials on YouTube, but the basic idea of soldering is you heat up the components that you want, and when they're hot enough, you're going to be able to then melt this soldering wire, and that melted wire fills in and creates an electrical contact that then connects whatever components you're trying to wire together. So for us right now, I have got a really good connection for that grounding wire. The nice thing about soldering is it is fairly instant. So yes, there's hot things and you do need to be careful. You don't want to touch things right away, but after a few seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, it is cool enough to then manipulate. So now I can come back and I can twist this around and show you there's our new soldered ground joint onto there. So this means I can kind of, I'm not going to go wrenching it out, but I can kind of manipulate this and be fairly confident that I'm not going to mess up too much other stuff. So here's what I want to do. I want to bend this wire so that I can reach. I can take those other wires and now I can start matching up with the notes. I know that this switch is going to be facing downwards. So I'm holding it, it's ultimately going to go down this way. So I have got a top, middle, and a bottom, and I know which wires have to go. I know the red wire goes in the top, that's for our neck pickup. White in the middle, that's signal going out, and green is the bridge. So that means, well, I just turned it upside down. That means that right now, I'm going to try to move and get these wires kind of pointed towards the ports that they're going to need to connect to. And to help me with this, I am going to use some needle nose pliers that might help me get them there. And I need to bend this around the end. That's what I need. I need just a little bit more clearance. The previous switch wasn't it was just, I guess, a little more compact than this one is. So these wires are a little on the short end, but if I can get away, if I can get by without needing to get more, and I think I can. So I'm gonna get these lined up and we'll come back and do the final soldering when they're all ready. So hang tight. All right, so I changed my mind again. In the middle of this, I realized that with the length that these wires are, I'm trying to do this without having to strip away and expose more wire. I'm gonna go ahead and solder them in one at a time. So I've got the neck pickup lined up here. So I'm gonna get that soldered in. And just like we did with the ground, I'm gonna use my dominant hand here to manipulate the iron because I wanna get this tip down here. You wanna heat up both the wire itself, but also the connection points, because we want this solder to flow smoothly to both. Oh, it just slipped out here. Hold on. That's one of the downsides of working with slightly too short wires, is if you don't get them just right, the slightest move can kind of start getting them can bump them loose. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to use these pliers. I'm going to try to put a little bit more of a bend. So that, there we go. With a little bit more of a bend, that's the hook is going to hold it, hopefully, hold it a little better in place. So I'm going to come back, I'm going to try heating this up again. I'm going to try to come from the back side here. Maybe that will help. There we go. I think that will help. As I heat this up, you kind of, you never really can tell necessarily when it's all going to go, but when it goes really quick. That looks like a really good solder joint. So we got the neck pickup done. So again, I'm going to try to line up the other ones and we'll do these one at a time and hopefully that'll get us there. So I'll be right back. Okay, I got the green wire or the bridge pickup lined up here. Once again, I tried to put a little bit of a hook into that, but we'll see if that holds. And one of the things you're going to learn pretty quickly with soldering is sometimes you got to just get into weird spots. I've got everything held the way that I want, so now I'm going to try to come at it from the front here. I'm going to try to, again, touch it without messing up what I got going on here, and there we go. you get an idea of when you know you have a good solder joint, when you get these smooth kind of joints. Sometimes if the solder isn't hot enough, it will bubble up and actually hold together in a sphere, but when it gets hot enough to flow, it then spreads out. And that's when you know you got a pretty good joint. And that's what we got there for our bridge pickup. So we're down to one more connection, and then we'll see if we can mount this. Just undo what we did the last time, just kind of put this through. So I'll be right back when I get that lined up. Okay, we got our last wire lined up here, and this one we're going to put a little extra solder on, only because this one, it actually joins two ports and they both have to get connected to the same wire. So again, as I said, just a second ago, sometimes you got to get into these weird locations. It's all lined up and it's precariously perched here. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to put a little solder on top, and then I'm going to try to see if I can get that to flow all the way through. And if I can't, then I'm going to add a little solder as I go. And I want to flip this over. I want to flip this over to see if I got anything. Okay, I need to add a little bit more to this back side here. And okay, now I can see it. Barely. But this way we can really get a good connection for, again, both of the wires coming out need to be connected to the same thing. So I think, actually, if I look at that, I've got a pretty decent joint there. I'm going to put a little more on top just to make sure I don't miss this here. All right. Well, I tell you, I'm happy with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mount this, and then we're going to do a check. I never really want to put away all my equipment until I check this. Now, there's no strings on this base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this switch back in there, just like the old switch was mounted. But then I'm going to plug in a cable. I'm going to turn on an amp, and without strings, I'm just going to go through the volume and the tones. I'm going to tap on the pickups. And if I can hear something just sound coming out of the pickups, then that means we've at least wired the signals correctly. So I'm going to get this mounted, and we'll come back and do that test to see what we got. Okay, I got things kind of cooled down, put away, and now it is the moment of truth. As you can see, I went and got a cable, so the base is plugged in, and obviously there's no strings here, but if we've done this correctly, what we can do, I also, I switched this. You saw earlier there was a black tip on there. I put it to a white tip. I think it looks a little cooler. So now we've got our new switch in there. So we should be able to switch from our neck pickup down to our bridge pickup and have combination of both. And what we should get, now I've got both of these should be the volumes and the tones. At least that's what it looks like from the back. So I've got them turned off. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through, and if I take like a screwdriver or something, like I said before, we can just do little taps. I feel that magnetic pull, so the pickups are magnetic, but you can hear now, that's just the physical acoustic sound of this tapping. But I've got it on the neck pickup. If I take the neck volume control, turn that up, now you can hear I've got an amp on in the background. The tone doesn't matter, but and you hear there's nothing in the bridge. And then you hear that tapping. If I turn the volume back off, it goes away. So we know that at least the neck pickup is wired. There's signal coming through. Okay, so let's come down. Let's check the bridge. So again, that was the neck. This is the bridge volume. So if it's off, there's nothing there. We turn it on. You can hear it coming through the amp, and back off. And there's nothing. And there should be, now if we do both, I'll put both volume control on. You hear it there, and you hear it coming out of there too. So it does look like, I'll turn these back off for us not using them. It looks like we've done the replacement correctly. So it just took a little bit of homework of kind of tracing wires and figuring out what was in there previously and what we wanted to put in to replace it. And after that, just with a couple quick solder joints, we're able to make a switch, and now we've got a functioning pickup selector. So we're one step closer to getting this bass ready to go. I want to thank you for watching today. And if this is your kind of stuff, if you found this helpful, hey, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, follow us on all of our social media accounts. All those links are in the description. And as always, until next time, play on, my friends. Play on.